Good. Grab your program. I want you to take notes as we look at John chapter 12 together here in a moment. I want to ask you a question just to get your brain thinking this morning as we look to God's Word. I want you to ask yourself this question. What am I doing here? I want to ask you that. What are you doing here? Why are you here this morning? What is it that caused you to get up on a snowy Sunday morning, drive here, park a long ways off, wait in line for the restroom, get, church coffee, that's kind of church coffee, what caused you to do this? What is it? What is this that's driven you to this place? What is it that's kind of given you this motivation to be here today? For some of us, I know that it's just a simple religious thing that we have always done, and so we do it, and here we are, and we're going through those motions. For those of us in that spot, not all of us, but some of us, it's kind of like the life has gone and got sucked out of it, and we're just kind of a shell of the old us. Like we remember when we were passionate. We remember when we were excited. We remember what it was like to be driven to experience God's love and His leadership and His grace and His goodness poured out on us. We remember those days, but they're kind of a distant memory. What are you doing here? Some of you, it's just as simple as like the guy or the girl that invited you was super cute, and you're just like, yes, I'm going to church today, and I don't even really care what they say or what they sing or whatever. Some of you, it's a little deeper than that, though, and it really comes from a place, and I think all of us have this kind of hunger in our heart, looking for something, an opportunity to step out of the life that's kind of just been there, and the existence that's just kind of really lacks some focus and some purpose and some passion, and to step toward becoming somebody that has eternal impact, somebody that really has a sense of confidence and clarity about our lives and about our existence. Many of us, we're sick of not knowing why we're here, why we're doing this, why we're enduring what we're enduring. And we're here today with an anticipation that we're going to get a glimpse of the opportunity of what is ahead of us. And I believe that this is given to us by God. There is a hunger inside of every single one of us. And that hunger really is a drive to know and find and do God's will, God's leadership, God's direction in our lives. And I know for many of us, that hunger, even as I talk about it, just kind of starts to well up inside you. You're like, yeah, I want to know what it's like to be free from the fear of what everybody thinks. I want to know what it's like to have clarity about my purpose and my existence. I want to know what confidence is, that I don't have to go from this person to that experience to this new job to try to find some sort of meaning for this life. I want to know what that's like. And this opportunity that we are all longing for, I believe, sits right in front of us today as we look at Jesus' leadership and Jesus' words to us as a people. And I'm praying that God would really speak to you directly. I was talking to a gentleman out here in the lobby today. He said 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when he was here just in service on his knees, crying, God speaking to him, saying, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter how far off you are, I love you and I have called you my son. To have that confidence, we were talking in the lobby, and just to hear the confidence in his voice, he's like a new man, a completely new creation. This is what I believe every one of us longs for. I want you to write this down because I believe that Jesus wants you to walk into this opportunity. Obedience is the door to your opportunity. The opportunity to become who God's made you to be. The opportunity to have purpose and direction. The opportunity to have vision and joy and fun again in your life. To have passion and direction and to have a sense of confidence. Obedience to Jesus is the door to your opportunity. I want you to write this down. Obedience is the door to your opportunity. Let's look at John chapter 12. We're going to look at verse 37, and God's going to, I believe He's going to speak to you in this passage here. Despite all the miracles and the miraculous signs Jesus had done, most of the people still did not believe in Him. This is exactly what Isaiah, this guy that lived 600-700 years before Jesus, the prophet, had predicted. Lord, who has believed our message? To whom has the Lord revealed His powerful arm? But the people couldn't believe, John writes, for as Isaiah also said, the Lord has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts so that their eyes cannot see and their hearts cannot understand and they cannot turn to me and have me heal them. Verse 41. Isaiah was referring to Jesus when he said this, because he saw the future and spoke of the Messiah's glory. Many people did believe in him, in Jesus, however, including some of these Jewish leaders, but they wouldn't admit it for fear that the Pharisees, these teachers of the law, would expel them or kick them out of the synagogue, the church. For they loved human praise more than the praise of God. I want to just underline that or circle verse 43 there. They loved human praise more than the praise of God. Jesus shouted to the crowds. I love John's writing. This is John's witness of Jesus. If you trust me, Jesus shouts, you are trusting not only me, but also God who sent me. For when you see me, you are seeing the one who sent me. I've come as the light to shine in this dark world, so that all who put their trust, confidence, faith in me will no longer remain in the dark. That's the opportunity we've been looking for. I don't want to walk in the dark. I don't want to stumble through this life. He said, if you put your trust in me, you will no longer remain in the dark. Verse 47, I will not judge those who hear me, but don't obey me. For I have come to save the world, not to judge it. But all who reject me and my message will be judged. Some of us go, oh, Jesus is going to judge us. That's awesome. But you will be judged on the day of judgment by the truth I have spoken. Verse 49, I don't speak on my own authority. The Father who sent me has commanded me what to say and how to say it. And I know his commands lead to eternal life. So I say whatever the Father tells me to say. Obedience to Jesus is the door to the opportunity for you to become who God is calling you to be. And really the whole title of this message is Generous Belief. We believe that Jesus is calling us to have a radical, generous belief, not a stingy belief that gets kind of just sucked down to this little tiny just thing of a notion or an idea or a concept that would lead you to talk about believing in God or say, yeah, I believe in God, but really not have any kind of action that equates with a belief in God. And I'm going to show you what I mean. And I think Jesus in John, in this passage, in John 12, is helping us to see the resistance or the barriers that get in the way of us being obedient to Jesus and really walking through the door to this opportunity to become who he's called us to be. How do we have a generous belief in our hearts? Well, the thing that I want to write down first, because John tackles this right off the bat when he quotes Isaiah in this prophecy, and Jesus is kind of helping us to put these pieces together. John is summarizing what's going on in the people's hearts. And I want you to write this down. The fear of man, of people, will always stop the work of God in our lives. I want you to hear this. The fear of man, of what people think about you, what they might say about you, of what they might be talking about you behind your back, of how much they like you. The fear of people, of mankind, will always, always, always stop the work of God in our lives. I'll say this, the one that you fear most is the one that you obey. The one that you fear most is the one that you aim to please. The one that you and I are trying to really kind of make sure that they're okay constantly is the one that we fear and the one that we are serving. And really, this prophecy in Isaiah in John 12 here is written to kind of see what happens as people continue to put their fear in people. Put their fear in what their friends think, what your coworkers think, what our spouse thinks, what all these other people think, that would lead us to not have a generous belief, but a stingy belief. A belief that says, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but really what they say in my life goes. The fear of man will always stop the work of God in our lives. John writes it in verse 41. Isaiah was referring to Jesus when he wrote this prophecy because he saw the future and spoke of the Messiah's glory. Many people did believe in him. However, including some of the Jewish leaders, they wouldn't admit it for fear that the Pharisees would expel them from the synagogue. You got to understand, this is the church. This is not only just the church, but it's also their culture. Like you're either a good Jew or you're a bad Jew, and there's really no in between. And if you were not a part of the synagogue, you weren't kind of in the graces of these leaders, you are out. You're outcast. You're a nobody. You're as bad as they get. You don't have any other opportunities. You don't have opportunities for advancement at work or in the social status. You don't have doors open to you at all. Everything is closed to you if you get cast out. And they're wrestling with this fear. And John summarizes it this way. They loved human praise more than the praise of God. I just want us to think about this for a minute, because I believe that we want to walk through this door, this opportunity to become who God has called us to be. I believe that about us. You're here today because you have a hunger inside you to become the man or the woman that God has called you and made you, designed you to be. The most fulfilled version of you. We long for that in us and in our lives. We long to have joy and to have freedom, have the grace of God overwhelming our lives. We don't want to be the worst version of us. Yet we stand at this door of opportunity, and here's what the wrestling match is that's going on in our heart. Who are we going to fear the most? Who are we going to listen to the most? Who are we going to acquiesce to the most? What are we going to where are we going to measure our decisions against? What they think, what God thinks. So obedience to Jesus and Jesus alone is the door to your opportunity. But many of us, because of this fear of what people think, we stop. We hesitate, and God's work stops in our hearts. I just want you to think about at work. Maybe, some of you guys. Think about the conversations that go on and just how much kind of backstabbing and sliding is going on. Just trying to lift. Guys, we do this all the time. As men, we feel like if we can kind of smack talk that guy and cut his knees out from underneath him, then I feel a little better about myself, especially if everybody else around me laughs. And we have this kind of routine about our work experience that just kind of is this massaging of this reputation with the fellas, with the guys at work. And as soon as there's a call to kind of this radical idea of maybe going against the grain or against the crowd, maybe it has to do with our marriage. Man, maybe it's a constant just belittling of our wives amongst the guys at work. And God's called us as men to be leaders in our homes, and we know that as leaders in our homes, it really starts with a posture of servanthood, sacrifice, of giving our lives, and to constantly be behind our wives' backs, belittling or demeaning, is really kind of stopping the work of God, the call of God in our lives to become His man, His leader in our home. Yet the pressure is there. I mean, for real, it's like we're in junior high still. What are they going to think about me? Well, what if they don't talk to me anymore? What if I'm kind of a weirdo? What if I don't get invited to go have beers after work anymore? What if? There's this tension in our hearts of like, oh man, and this anxiety kind of bubbles up. And again, I'll just say it, those who we fear most are the ones that we obey. And this fear of man will stop the work of God in our lives. Paul writes about a really dark road that many of us can get on if we're not careful. And the Isaiah the prophet is writing about this, how these hearts are so hard. And it's literally like God has given them over to their unbelief. And it's this persistent unbelief, this persistent ignoring of God's leadership, of God's voice. Some of us, we're like, man, if God spoke to me, I would do what He told me to do. But it's like God has kind of been speaking to you for years and years, or for months and months, for weeks and weeks. And as you continue to ignore His leadership in your heart and your life, as you continue to ignore the Spirit of God saying, hey, don't talk about your wife that way. Hey, ladies, don't talk about your husbands that way. As you ignore that and suppress that, then it gets harder and harder to hear the voice of God in our hearts. And this slippery slope is really a dark road. And Isaiah the prophet writes about it, and then Paul writes about it in Romans 1. I want you to write this down. It is possible for God to give you over to your willful unbelief. It really is a very dark road. Dark road. In Romans 1, Paul describes it for us. I want you to hear this. Really, I want you to hear this as a warning. I don't want you to hear this as a condemning thing. I want you to hear this as a warning. In Romans 1, he writes this. Yes, they knew God. Many of us in the room. I know who God is. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I believe He can save me from my sins. I believe in God. I know God, right? Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship Him as God or even give Him thanks. I just want you to think for a moment. When was the last time you thanked God for His work in your life? This is just an indication of where you're at on the road. You take this simple step, and it's just the beginning down this dark road. They began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. God can't see me. He doesn't know I'm gossiping with all the fellas. He doesn't know I'm cheating on my wife. He doesn't know I'm looking at porn. God doesn't care about this stuff. You're making up foolish ideas about God like he doesn't know and he doesn't see. Like he doesn't care about our lives and about our sin and about our turmoil. We make up these foolish ideas to kind of make ourselves feel better. It's really a callousing of our hearts is what's going on. This is a warning, again, that Paul writes here in Romans 1. And I want us to heed this warning, to hear this warning, because Isaiah is writing and prophesying, and John records it in chapter 12 of the Gospel of John. Like, look, these people's hearts were so hard they couldn't even see the work of God. They couldn't even hear the good news about Jesus Christ. And it starts with this simple thing of just not giving thanks to God, not acknowledging his work in our lives, and then starting to make up foolish, silly ideas like he doesn't know. He doesn't care. He can't see. The truth of God is that he knows everything. He sees everything. He is everywhere. He knows your thoughts before you think them. And this truth really can get kind of pushed to the side in our hearts. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Some of you would say, that's totally me right now. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. Here's what scares me about this verse right here, verse 22. So many of us walk through this life with our chest kind of puffed up like we got this thing dialed in. Like I know what I'm talking about and I know how I'm going to make sense of my life and I've got this thing wired and figured out. And it's kind of like survival in this world depends on how much I project how wise I am, how great I am. In God's eyes, being utter fools. Look at verse 24. So God abandoned them. I want you to hear this. God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshiped and served the things God created, like people, jobs, money, success, instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. This is a warning. This is a contrast. Generous belief is this contrasted here in this story with this stingy idea of like, I can talk about having an idea of God and kind of this belief in God that just talks about it and thinks about it or theorizes about it or philosophizes about it or really just kind of ponders it, but really doesn't do anything with it. And that's the disconnect that Jesus is getting at in this story. A generous belief is not just a theory or an idea or a philosophy or a theology or a textbook. It leads to action. I'm going to show you this in the rest of this passage here, but I just got to tell you, man, I've been reading in the second century, these church fathers and these leaders of the church. I'm talking like 3 generations since Jesus was on the scene right here. I mean, this guy John that is writing this, he discipled a guy, and then he died, and then he discipled a guy. I'm talking about that third guy that's removed from this story that we're reading a couple thousand years ago. He's pleading with the church, like I'm pleading with us today, to not allow this idea of who God is and Jesus' leadership to just become a distant thought or an idea or a concept or a theory, but to always keep our hearts in tune with what Jesus is calling us to do and do it. This is a radical, very generous belief that leads to action, that leads to obedience. Remember, obedience is the door to your opportunity. Write this down. Generous belief is Jesus' words combined with obedience. A stingy belief is just Jesus' words or some ideas about what Jesus kind of says or thinks about, and we just talk about it. We just have an idea of it. It doesn't ever lead to actual action in our life, obedience. In John chapter 12, verse 46, Jesus says, he actually yells, I have come as the light to shine in this dark world. Those of you that are in the room that feel dark and confused because you've been heading down that dark road of deception and unbelief, you're now at the spot where you're like, I am in the dark. Jesus said, I come as a light to shine in this dark world so that all who put their trust, confidence, faith in me will no longer remain in the dark. This is good news. I hope you understand how great of news this is. That those of us left to ourselves, we walk down this dark road, we walk down to this place where we're literally fooling ourselves, thinking we're all wise and got it all together, and we find ourselves completely in the dark, looking for an opportunity today to take a step back towards God. Maybe it's been years. You've been in and out of churches, you've kind of critiqued them all in town, and none of them really measure up to your idea of what church ought to be, yet your heart remains disengaged from Jesus in a real relationship with Him. You've thought kind of like the concept of Jesus and His church is just an idea, and hopefully somebody in this town can get it right, and you've just gone from church to church to church, kind of shopping and hoping to find the right one, and your heart is completely disengaged. You find yourself in a dark and confused spot, and Jesus is saying, good news, I've come to be a light in this dark world so that you don't have to walk in this fear of what everybody else thinks. You don't have to walk in this fear of unknown purpose and certainty and confidence in this life. You can walk in this light. This is good news. Jesus says this. Good. You can get excited. That's awesome. I want you to hear this, though. Look at this. Jesus says, I will not judge those who hear me, but don't obey me. Jesus is doing something here. Hear me and obey me. Hear me and obey me. He's putting two things together right here that are inseparable. He's putting two things together here. He said, I'm not going to judge those who hear me but don't obey me. So it's possible for you to hear Jesus and not obey Him. It is possible for you to sit here today and hear God's word to you and not do something with it. It is possible for us to exist in a church system, to go from church to church, to have religious duties and religious tasks in our lives, to hear what God's commands are to us and not do anything with them. It is possible. Jesus Himself is saying, I'm not going to judge those of you that do that. For I have come to save the world and not to judge it. But listen, all who reject me and my message, He's putting them back together again, will be judged. Don't play games like you think there's no judgment, like there's no idea that someday there will be a judgment day. And Jesus said, look, your judge is every word that I've spoken. Your judge is not me, but every word that I've spoken. How are you doing obeying Jesus' word in our lives? How are you doing at moving to action? This is why we talk about take your next step. As a church, we are so passionate about us not just staying in a philosophy thinking mode. Like, that's a good point. I should ponder that. Pondering really doesn't do much. I mean, it's good to think about stuff and mull over stuff and meditate on stuff, and I get all that. But seriously, at some point, it's got to move you to action. This pastor in the 2nd century, he is pleading for the church to move to action. The guys in the 30s and 40s, they're pleading for the church to move to action. The awakening of Jesus' church comes when Jesus' people actually start doing what Jesus has told them to do. This is where the miracle starts. It's not that we just leave it as a concept and an idea and a good theory, but that we go to action. Jesus has always kept the two together. And this is a call for us to have a generous belief. Write this down. Belief and action always go together. They're never separate. Never. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey me. That's John 14:15. If you love me, you'll obey me. You'll do what I say. None of you would think your kids are good kids if they listen to you, nod their heads, and then walk the other direction, disobeying what you asked them to do. You wouldn't think they're a good kid. And many of us in spiritual infancy and spiritual childhood are doing the exact same thing to God. Oh, it's a good idea. And that dude that shows up at 7 and serves in the mornings, that's craziness. I got sleep I got to catch up. I got stuff I got to do. Go to a connect group. Are you kidding me? My life is so hectic and my kids' sports schedules, and I got to work overtime to pay for this car that I just bought. There's so much that I got to do. Are you kidding me? I'll just leave that as a theory. Good idea, Jesus. I need to be connected with other people. That's a good thought. You don't actually lead to action. This is the kind of generous belief that Jesus is calling us to have. A generous, radical belief that leads us to a place of obedience. Remember, I said at the beginning, obedience to Jesus is the door to your opportunity to become the man or woman that God has called you to be. This is how simple, but how hard it is. Do what Jesus tells you to do. Simple, but very difficult. It's not rocket science. I overcomplicate everything. Some of you do the same thing, and we try to make it a big idea and a big theory, and we're gonna strategize about it and plan it and put it on our calendars and do all these different, right? He's like, no, just go across the street, talk to them. Just ask them their name. What if you just went to the next cubicle over and asked, they're struggling. Why are they crying on the phone every single day? Can I pray for you? Is there something that I could do? Go to the hospital. Show up in the moment of crisis. Don't avoid them. Don't pretend like it's not there. Ask them how they're doing. It's just simple. And this is really the call to action that I believe Jesus is calling us to as a church. So here's how I want to end today. We're going to get super tech savvy on you real quick here. How many of you people are high-tech people? Like 2 of us, okay. How many of you are on Facebook? How many of you? Don't be embarrassed. I know. Yes, you all do Facebook. We see all your likes on our page, okay. How many of you people are Twitter people? There's a few of us, okay. How about Instagram? Put your hands in the air, okay. The next 5 days, I want to call us to something super radical. Like no church would ever do this. To read what Jesus says and then to do what Jesus says. The next 5 days, I want to call us to be in Matthew 5. Just a simple passage. My wife was asking me last night, why Matthew 5? It's really the beginning of Jesus' first sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. He gives the Beatitudes of what his kingdom is like and people in his kingdom. Then he goes on to talk about, how we are to handle our anger, how we're to handle our adultery. What does Jesus think about divorce? What does Jesus think about judgment and judging other people? What does Jesus think about purity in your heart and your life? It's very simple teaching, very difficult, but very simple. And here's the generous belief that I'm calling us to, and I believe Jesus is calling us to as a people, is to spend 5 days in Matthew 5 to read just a chunk every single day, just a little bit. I'm not asking you to read the whole thing over and over again. Maybe you're going to do that. But just to start tomorrow, Monday through Friday this week, and this is going to be our hashtag. How many of you know what a hashtag is? Man, about like 20% of us. We're going to be in trouble, people. Hashtag, that's that pound sign right there, okay? It's a way for us to track socially what's going on. It's a way for us to be unified as a church across the social media kind of wavelengths that there are. On your Facebook account, on your Twitter account, on your Instagram account, you can hashtag 5 and Matt 5, just like it shows up there on the screen. And then any of us, at any point in the time this week, we can click on that hashtag, and it'll take us to that spot where all of our collection of what God is calling us to do, and maybe the result of what happened when you did what Jesus told you to do. Maybe you're going to put the scripture on there and how Jesus is challenging you with that scripture. Maybe on Instagram you're going to take a really cool picture with the vintage little, filter on it, all right? And hashtag no filter or something, right? All you non-Instagram people know what I'm talking about. Don't know what I'm talking about. We're going to get to this spot though where we're going to just collect this week the work of God in our lives. That's what we're going to do. We're going to encourage each other. Some of you that are not in a connect group, I made the joke earlier, like you're going to read this book by yourself. This is going to be an opportunity for you, maybe with this hashtag, just to get a glimpse of what it's like to be a part of our connect groups. The encouragement, man, you get to hear from other people and what they're doing. You're going to be like, what? They did that? They actually talked to their neighbor? They actually forgave that person that abused them? What? And you're going to be encouraged to act yourself. And this is the generous belief I believe Jesus is calling us to have. To move to action. To not be a people that just theorize about good Christian ideas or ideals or do great religious things, but move to action. The movement of God is always being established as people take Jesus' words to heart and move to action. It's the kind of people that I believe God is calling us to be. Generous in our belief, generous in our hearts, generous in our actions, generous with our words, generous with our finances, generous with our time, our energy, our passion. God, move us to action.